Well, it is a seriously cold day out here in Georgia, and I can think of nothing better that I could do to finish out my day but to go and curl up in my favorite chair and answer some of the questions you asked. So put in those earbuds, grab a cup of coffee, or maybe even do some decluttering, do the dishes, but let's go through these questions that you asked. Well, hello, friend. I'm Mary Beth with At What Cost, where we are learning to apply God's truths to our everyday lives. And the way that we have discovered to do that best is by living a more minimalistic lifestyle. So about a year and a half ago, my family and I started out on this journey to have less stuff. And we're going to talk about some of the things that happened along the way. And I am going to answer your questions that you asked about all kinds of different topics. It was really a good selection of questions. So Caroline Holly asks, how do you manage kids' toys, specifically at birthdays and Christmas, when they get so much from family and friends? We have tried to ask them to cut back, move towards experiences, but the toys keep coming. And I have been asked about toys several times. So I view managing toys in our home, regardless of how they come into our home, the same way that I view almost any other parenting topic. So it's my responsibility as the parent to make sure that I'm monitoring the things that my kids have going on. So if they are strung out and they're not managing their toys well, then it's time for us to learn the lesson that sometimes abundance in the wrong direction and in the wrong place really can cause us stress and overwhelm, and it's okay for us to part with some of those things so that we can better enjoy the things that we have. It's just like us as adults. If we have too much of something, it becomes frustrating, we can't keep up with it, and ultimately we end up being overwhelmed, which is how many people have found this lifestyle to begin with. And so I want to start structuring our home in a way that is conducive to teaching that lesson. So we have a sort of one in, one out kind of rule, and the same thing goes for birthdays and Christmases. Now, usually I will prepare kind of ahead of time, and we'll talk about some of the things that they have, like, hey, are you really playing with this? What do you think about that? And more often than not, they have not wanted to get rid of anything. It's never been easy, but it is pretty simple. We don't really enjoy parting with things, but ultimately, when they had a lot less to manage and there was more space in their rooms to play, it took them a lot less time to clean things up. They have been on board pretty much since then. And the other question that I get frequently is, do we rotate toys? And the answer to that is no, which goes against the grain of all of my early childhood education experience, because when I was teaching pre-K and working in the childcare industry, I frequently rotated toys in my classroom. I have found at home, though, that when I store those toys and bring out new things, I totally forget about the things that I have stored, and by the time I really get back into that space to dig it all out, they've either outgrown it or they're not interested in it anymore. What really ends up happening is kind of a natural rotation through birthdays and holidays and things that come in, and so there always tends to be something different, or they can learn to play with something in a different way. So we try and do a lot of open-ended toys so that they can have different experiences with them and not always play the same things. My dear friend Rebecca McCall asks, what Easter traditions does your family normally have? And more broadly, Americans, because my sweet friend Rebecca is in Australia. I have just realized that we have public holidays and Good Friday and Easter Monday. Can you confirm that the U.S. doesn't? Well, that is a tricky question because some folks do have Good Friday off. I don't know that I've ever heard of anyone having the Monday following Easter off, but I know Good Friday does tend to be a holiday for some people and not for others. And also, will you do anything for Lent? So, our church actually does not observe Lent, but we do have a lot of other Easter traditions that we enjoy doing. So, our church typically has an Easter egg hunt, and a lot of that centers around the Easter story. And then in our home, we do a lot of very Easter centered story times and activities like resurrection rolls. That has been a fun one where you take a crescent roll and roll a marshmallow in some butter and cinnamon and sugar and wrap it up inside the crescent roll. And then when you bake it, it's empty. So it kind of signifies the empty tomb. And we talk about some of those things. And then we always have a really good big family dinner on Easter Sunday. And we do go to church on Good Friday. Heidi Fechtow asks, I'm new to your channel and I'm also on a minimalist journey and would like to know what has been the hardest thing to change when it came to minimizing and what was easier than you thought it would be. She's also looking for ways to encourage more Bible reading time with a 12-year-old and 16-year-old. Any advice? So this question is a little bit harder for me to answer when it comes to the 12-year-old and 16-year-old and doing a little bit more Bible lessons. So our oldest son is 9. He will be 10 here in a little while. And I know right now I have a very captive audience, but in the years to come, I know that he may not want to sit down with me and do some Bible studying. I have found though, when I give my kids a more active opportunity to participate in it and they get to kind of take the reins, so to speak, they've been much more into studying and reading any devotionals that we have, just really being able to answer questions that they have about faith and kind of, giving them the reins, but within our own boundaries. So maybe you suggest a book that you guys all read together and talk about it at a certain time, at the dinner table or maybe after dinner, just having some kind of low-key time. And it doesn't even really have to be daily. I think initially I would start with once a week, maybe even giving them a prompt, like a question to ask. This is a verse that I read. How do you feel about that? And then giving them some time to think on it and kind of get back with you. But I think some of that is going to depend on just your relationship with your kids and how open the discussion is right now, but certainly making sure that the door is open, that you give them opportunities, and just trying to keep initiating that conversation. And eventually, when they know that you're listening, they'll start talking. Now, back on the minimalism side. So, what has been the most challenging to change? I think the most challenging aspect of really changing the way that we lived in our home was adjusting to having less. When you have a space that is very full of stuff, even if it's not like junk, we had spaces that just had a lot of home decor and it was difficult to dust. It felt cluttered. It made the room feel really heavy. And so when I decluttered all of that stuff, we had a lot of open space. And I didn't anticipate that like my rooms may sound different after I have taken things out of them, and that space may really start to look kind of empty for a little while. But after living with it for a few days and a week, it felt a lot more comfortable. And so in those first few days, I was really tempted to add some things back in, but just felt very convicted that I was going to give it some time, let the dust settle, so to speak, and just see how it felt. And then if I wanted to add things back in so that it felt comfortable or cozy, then I did. But truth be told, I never actually added anything back in. We love our open spaces, our cleared countertops, the tops of cabinets. I mean, I had so much home decor just trying to make everything Pinterest worthy that the rooms ended up feeling heavy and not cozy. And as far as what was easier than I anticipated, it would be by far maintenance. I really felt like we were going to just go right back to the way that things were. I had tried organizing systems before and nothing ever worked. And so when we started this journey, I was convinced that we would just end up right back where we started. But because we enjoyed this space so much and it made so many things in life easier, I was happy to maintain it. In fact, I really changed a lot of my habits just because I knew I didn't want to bring something else back into the house that I would just be taking off for a donation a couple of months later. Barbara Gibson asks, how do you stay positive during trials? Is it a struggle or are you just a naturally positive person? I am not a naturally positive person. I do tend to look on the bright side. I do tend to be somewhat of an encourager, but when things get really tough, it can be easy for me to feel overwhelmed. That has been another huge benefit in minimalism. Having less to manage really reduces the amount of stress that I have, and having an environment that I can come into that feels very low key and low maintenance has freed up so much mental space in other areas of my life that stress just doesn't push in like it used to. But now, when it comes to trials, I have spent a tremendous amount of time studying the book of First Peter. It is just really a book that I feel like speaks to my soul in a way that is different than any other book. It reminds me that all of the things that I'm facing in this world are temporary, that there is an eternal timeline, and even though I feel so caught up in all of it, the things that are yet to come are so much better than the things that I'm stressing over right now. And it just kind of recenters my thinking. That was a great question, Barbara. Thank you. Michelle Omer asked, may you please share how you do your family budget? How do you tell friends and family not to give material gifts without offending them? And is your husband on board with a more minimalist home? And any advice that you would give a spouse that is not supportive or willing to help? You got all the good questions in there, Michelle. So, our family budget is not something that I really maintain. My husband is a whiz when it comes to a family budget spreadsheet. So, his system really is he uses an Excel spreadsheet and lists out all of our income, all of our expenses. We budget about $100 per person per month for groceries, and I try to be pretty economical when I buy my groceries. Meal planning really helps with that. And then our intention is really just to make sure that we are putting money into savings, that we have not overextended ourselves with payments. If we need to wait on something, we wait on it. When the time has come that we're able to make a financial move, we do. But really, I just kind of yield to him in that department because he just has such a gifting with figuring out where we need to put our money and how best to invest it and take care of those things, what to pay, when to pay it. He really has that side of our budget down. Really, I think what has helped more than anything with family budgeting is that we just try our best to live within our means. If it doesn't fit into the budget this month, then we don't do it. I am going to see if I can't get him to talk a little bit more about that and his rationale behind it in an upcoming video. So stay tuned for that. It may take a little while because the second part of this question is that no, my husband was not on board with this in the beginning. It's not his natural inclination to get rid of things. A lot of things are very sentimental to him. And so parting with things that are useful or that we paid money for or that are sentimental in nature was pretty difficult for him. But ultimately, I just kept plugging along in the areas that I could and making a difference in the areas that I could. As long as things are functioning and I'm not getting rid of any of the things that he actually wants, then we've been okay. But I certainly did not come home one day and say, hey, guess what? We're going to get rid of all of our stuff and life's going to be great. And he busted out the pom-poms and wanted to cheer me on. That is not how it happened at all. Now, I will say, after the last year and a half, there has definitely been a shift in his thinking. It just takes time for some of the other people in our homes to process the way that things feel. And we can't control everybody else. We can only control ourselves, really. And so, just working in the areas of your home that you feel the most responsible in, leading by example is the best advice that I can give. That and be patient. It doesn't happen overnight for anyone, and the likelihood that you are going to make a major change and everybody in your household is going to be on board is pretty low. And I don't mean that to be discouraging, but encouraging rather, that you may be the one who has to plow the way and do the hard things and just keep going, because you know when you get to the other side, it's going to be great. And when you get there, all of them will be there with you. So it will happen. They do come along at some point, but to say that he is like super in love with minimalism or would even consider himself to be a minimalist probably is not the case. And that's okay. My house is still simplified. It takes a lot less time to clean, and we're happy all the way around. So the next question is from Marcy with Mix It Up Marcy. And if you have not checked out her channel, I will link it in the description below. She is all about arts and crafts, and it is a great channel. So Marcy asks, what do you find the most challenging with your children? And this question, just in general, morning time. Morning time has been very challenging lately. Getting everybody up and out the door and back to school, having a routine that people actually follow has just been very challenging and discouraging. And that is where I go right back to First Peter because otherwise, like, I can't sit and wallow in it, but ultimately it's a season of life and we'll get through it. So Debbie Youngblood asked, in doing Bible study, I read a passage of scripture, which could be 3 to 10 verses depending on the subtitle in the chapter. I'd like to be able to write down in my notebook sort of a summary of what I've learned. What method do you have or might know that might work best? So this is a new way of studying for me, to write summaries. And I have a couple of things that have helped with that I have found really useful. The first is one that I have been using for a couple of months now. And really, you can use a notebook. Like, you can write any of this in anything. But for me, I have been using these Illuminated scripture journals. And so this one is of Genesis. This just happens to be what I am teaching right now for Bible study, but it has, I don't know if you'll be able to see that with the lighting. Let's see. So it has the scripture on one side, and then it has a blank page on the other side. And so what I can do is really make any notes that I need to. There's enough space to write right around the scripture. There's also space on the opposing page that I can make any notes or any summaries. Like, there's room just right there. And they have one for every book of the Bible. The other resource that I have been using lately is from the Daily Grace Company. And I purchased, it's a set of 4, and this is called the Story of Redemption Journal. So this is volume 1, and it has Genesis through 2 Samuel. So when you open this, there's a page right at the beginning that has an opportunity for you to write keywords, themes, and key verses. And then each chapter in that particular book of the Bible has a space for you to write a summary. Now, you could easily set up something like this in just a regular 25-cent spiral notebook. In fact, I pick those up sometimes during back to school time, and I have made notes similarly in that kind of notebook. So those are 2 of the more, I guess you could say, vehicles that I use to summarize. Have to kind of get myself a little adjusted. So my other dear friend here, Lee France, asks, What do you think of the different Bible translations that are out there? How do you know which ones are best? This is a hard question to answer. Okay, so battery died, which means maybe I need to rethink my answer on the Bible translations, which that's not true. I just needed to change the battery because we have been answering questions for quite a while now. So one of the first things to understand and really think through is how a Bible translation comes together to begin with. So we are going to talk a little bit more about this on a Study Tip Sunday video, or maybe even a few, because this is a topic that we could talk a lot about. But typically a translation is going to be a word for word, thought for thought, or idea for idea. And it really comes down to personal preference. Now, that being said, people have some very strong opinions about their Bible translations. And I wouldn't say that I have strong opinions about Bible translations, but I do have some mildly strong opinions about them. So I typically read the ESV or the NIV. My preferred Bible that I use more than any other Bible is the Reformation Study Bible. I love the study notes that are in there, and I really trust a lot of the source that comes from. So that's something to consider when you're thinking about Bible translations, that it's not just the translation, but also the commentary that may be in it if it is a study Bible. But again, we are going to talk more about translations in an upcoming Sunday Study Tips video. So the last question that I have is from CJB, and she says, what are some ideas for devotionals for little kids? What do you and your family do? Is it daily or weekly? How do you get your kids involved? So we talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the video, that we do it when we have a very captive audience. So initially we used the Jesus Storybook Bible. It is very readable and understandable. Again, kind of like Bible translations, some people have very strong opinions about it. And again, our kids are younger, so they're 9, 8, and 6. But when we really introduced this in the very beginning of our parenting journey, they were 5, 4, and 1. And so reading the Jesus Storybook Bible was a very age-appropriate, natural way for us to include Bible stories, but they also are attending church Sunday school. We attend church services regularly. We talk about things. We listen to worship music. And so there's a really, I guess, when I really think about it, kind of an immersive, more of an immersive kind of faith culture that we're developing in our home. Now, the other thing that we have used, I need to find it, I don't know where it is right now, hold on 1 minute, is a Great Commission publications. And don't freak out, just hang with me for a second, okay? Because initially I was like, I don't know about that. But we also have used this First Catechism, and this is from Great Commission publications. And if that didn't show up, I will do a picture over this. So for many Reformed theologies, they are based in the Westminster Confession of Faith or Westminster shorter or longer catechisms. So this is actually kind of a primer for the Westminster shorter catechisms. And it has questions, and I'll read a few of them just so you can get a feel for it. So the first question is, who made you? The answer, God. What else did God make? God made all things. Why did God make you and all things? Well, for his own glory. How can you glorify God? By loving him and doing what he commands. So much like we have talked about in other parts of this video, I am a very firm believer in starting to develop that kind of expectation, vocabulary, the things that you are really wanting to develop in your children long before they maybe even understand it. I'll link a video in the description of something that helped me to kind of understand this idea of training up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And it really is about building the vocabulary and having that established, even if they don't completely understand the meaning. So we fill the vocabulary in, and then we work on the more complex and abstract thought and understanding that really comes along with our faith. But I would say, as far as getting my kids involved in our faith, that has really been like any other interest that we have tried to develop. It's things that we demonstrate. I can't expect for them to engage in Sunday school if I don't engage in Sunday school. I can't expect for them to engage in Bible study if they don't see me first demonstrating it. And so it's again an example of lead by example. But those are two of the resources that we have used, or I guess three of the resources that we have used. And I would love to hear in the comments any of the other resources that any of you guys may have that you have used for devotionals or to get your kids involved and interested in our faith. So I think that about wraps it up. I know this video was a little bit longer than usual, and so I appreciate all of you who stuck with it and have been here until the end. I am so appreciative of our viewers. You're so encouraging, and oftentimes reading your comments is one of the best parts of my day. So keep those questions coming. Again, you can find me here every Friday with a family minimalism video and every Sunday with a study tip Sunday. Be sure to subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you in the next one.